Yes, good afternoon, our dear viewers, and we are back with the Inter-University Interface Debate Championship. This afternoon, we are having Makerere University, who are going to be dissecting the topic, the state of civic space in Uganda. How does the shrinking civic space context affect universities as marketplaces for ideas? And to dissect this, we have Tracy Chirabo. Tracy is from the College of Natural Sciences, doing a bachelor's degree in biotechnology. We have Mr. Baruku Derek. Tracy, can you confirm that you're on?
Yes, I'm
Tracy?
on. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, we needed confirmation that you're on. From the School of Economics, we have Mr. Baruku Derek. Baruku, it's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm on.
Yes, and from the College of Veterinary Medicine is Ruth Chobutunji. Ruth, confirm that you're on. It's a pleasure to have you.
I'm pleased to be with you too. I'm on.
Yes, and the Right Honorable Speaker of the Makerere Law Society, Mr. Benson Mayanja. Mr. Mayanja, it's a privilege to have you on board.
Council Matanda, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and Right Honorable, I'm going to start right with you. You have 3 minutes to help us make sense of today's topic.
Just to confirm, am I visible and audible to the rest of my colleagues and everyone else?
I can confirm that you're audible and visible, so go right ahead.
All right, thank you very much. In the wake of the recent shutdown of the civil societies, it's really incumbent upon us to dissect the intricacies that exist within such a space and to understand why exactly this is happening and the fate of Ugandan democracy in that respect. My name is Benson Mayanja. I am the Right Honorable Speaker for the Makerere Law Society. Very privileged to be here to discuss this very pertinent issue. So it takes us back to the understanding of the origins of the civil space in order to understand what exactly it is. Before we can even start to dissect how it affects universities, it's very important to understand about 3 questions pertinent to this issue. Firstly is the interpretation of civil society organizations, thereby understanding what the civil space is, but then also going ahead to understand the role of universities in a contemporary democracy, and then the synergy or the intersection that comes within those two. So it's very paramount for us to trace back to pre-colonial times if we want to understand, like pre-colonial, pre-independence civil societies and post-independence civil societies. Now, civil societies eventually evolved as a development alternative to state-led organizations. So previously what we had before were merely trade unions and the ideas of unionism, right? So we had things such as the African Motor Drivers Association that was started by Ike Musazi, and all these other, like unions that essentially played a role in political dissemination and understanding of political rights. Essentially, what you get to see today is a merely, like a proliferation of the same ideas. When you look at different civil societies, you look at FHRI, you look at, Center for Constitutional Governance. All these particular civil societies then come up with at least a defined definition that at least World Bank and African Development Bank and Van Dyke in 2013 got to agree that they are non-governmental and non-profit organizations that aim at engaging inclusive development of citizens. So at that very point, we get to understand that at least 2 things from it. It's non-government, and it doesn't necessarily have to look for profit, but must have inclusive participation of the citizenry. So then you ask yourself, where exactly do we have the active citizenry? When you look at a country like Uganda, where most of its demographic has youths, you get to understand that these university students then become very important to the cause of civil societies. So when you look at the pedagogical studies of universities and how they teach the things that they teach at the university, civil societies get to benefit so much in regard to research work, in regard to mobilization, in regard to, all these kinds of things that enable civil societies to thrive on their values, on their impact, and on the, like operationalization of the things that they do. So it's very important to ask yourself, in the wake of the closure of the civil space, what does that mean for the universities? And we think these are very, very pertinent issues that we intend to dissect. Later on, I will be very privileged to have a conversation on the same among the research work and the employment perspectives for the citizens. Thank you very much. I imagine my time is far too spent, so I'd like to just
Thank you for being time conscious, Right Honorable Benston. And allow me now to bring in Tracy Cherabo. You have 3 minutes to help us make sense of this presentation, maybe building on from where Mayanja stopped.
Thank you so much. I'd like to know if I'm being heard. Am I clear?
You are clear both in terms of audio and visual. So, all right.
Thank you. So the topic, how does the shrinking civil space context affect universities as marketplace for ideas? When I saw this topic, I thought I went ahead to research what a civil space is, whereby a civil space is it's created by a set of universally accepted rules which allow people to organize, participate, and communicate with each other without hindrance. And civil space, generally, a civil space is purposely to allow the free flow of information. And when you go ahead to know what a shrinking civil space is, you know what the word shrinking means is to become smaller in size. So meaning this access, this free flow of information has gone smaller in size and definitely has gone ahead to affect universities as a marketplace for ideas. So we very well know that university students or universities at large have so many people. There are thousands of students in universities. So definitely when students are at school, they are not just going to learn, but they're also exchanging so many things. So basically, we know that civil spaces, in most cases, are supported by NGOs, non-government organizations, which we have about 54 that have been closed by the government of Uganda. And we have gone ahead to see that this has had a very negative impact on the universities. So I have a bit of my points here, but which I think I will share with time into the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. Can we now hear from Mr. Baruku David, Baruku Derek rather? You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Baluku Derek, and I am from the School of Economics. I'm also actually a cabinet member of Makerere Debating Union. And this is very important for civic space and freedom generally. So about civic space, Benson has quite hinted a lot about the history of civic space, about how it's about space, the core values, and what exactly it entails. So we all know that civic space, it could be a place, it could be a virtual, it could be physical, whereby it enables people to come together to express themselves freely. The core values of civic space, of which you could take freedom of association, you could take peaceful assembly, you could take freedom of free expression. If people generally have freedoms to express themselves freely, to peacefully assemble at any time, any day, anywhere they want, and maybe to express themselves, you could talk about free speech. So during this time, and we've seen a lot of shrinking space of the civic space. There's been a lot of concerns about the shrinking space of the civic space. For example, we can talk about the clamp down on internet, more so on Facebook. We all know in Uganda, in the run towards the general elections, that Facebook was actually closed. So that impinges directly on civic space, because during this COVID-19 period, we've seen a lot of shift towards online or virtual spaces, because there is very little engagement through physical means. So people have actually turned to online or virtual spaces to make sure that they engage or freely associate with others. But then we've seen a clampdown on our internet, more so our Facebook. Facebook was actually closed in Uganda. We've also seen the social media tax, that 12% tax that was imposed on social media. So all that impinges on the civic space. Then we've also seen the closure of NGOs and civil society organizations, which my friend Tracy has also hinted about. For example, civil societies, for example, GLIS and so on, all these have been closed. Then another concern is about the continued arrest of student activists. Any of us who has been at Makerere University or any other university, you've seen whenever students want to come up to express themselves freely, you've seen a lot of pressure, a lot of force that is actually exerted on these people. They are not allowed to freely express themselves, and that has very great implications toward innovations, towards freedom and the general situation of democracy in the whole country. So with time, I guess I would be exploring that. Thank you so much for the time.
Wow, I see that the conversation is now taking shape and getting more exciting. And so finally, but by no means least, Ruthie Chobtunji, help us put this in perspective. You have heard from your colleagues. I don't know if you're bringing on a new perspective or agreeing with what they have stated. You have 3 minutes.
So civic space is created by a set of universally accepted rules which allow people to organize, participate, and communicate with each other freely and without hindrance. And in doing so, we are going to be promoting democracy. Well, for civic space to happen, we have to have basic things, yeah? We have to have a freedom of association, a freedom of peaceful assembly, a freedom of expression, free speech, and any other way we could wish to express ourselves. And these things must be guaranteed by the law. So what is the situation in Uganda right now? Are people being allowed to associate freely? Are people allowed to peacefully assemble, even if it is written in a document that all traders want to assemble, well, university students want to assemble and have a talk or something for whatever reason it may be, without police coming up and making claims and perhaps arresting leaders? It is actually a question that we pose to ourselves. So the theme today would be, how does the shrinking civic space context affect universities as marketplaces for ideas? Clearly from this, it is stated that universities are marketplaces for ideas, because it is in this time that people are at the prime of their lives. It is this time when people want to cause a revolution that people meet, if it is for scientific research at the university. So therefore, if the civil space is actually shrinking, the issue would be that those things that we would have achieved as university students, as a society, as a country, through people associating, through people expressing themselves and Mercury democracy, does not mean that you say something I want to hear, but it is your opinion. So you say it, and because you're protected by the law, I come to accept. I would like to say that, of course, if there is a shrinking civil space, it not only affects universities negatively, but it impacts us as a country, because leaders are actually going to come from universities. We are being shaped. So if we cannot associate, if we cannot express ourselves, what is the future of this country? Thank you very much, Matanda.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. And now that we have had our opening statements, we can now move to the actual substance, so call it the body of our presentations. And I'm going to go back to Right Honorable Benson Mayanja. You have 5 minutes now to make your case.
All right, thank you very much. Just allow me the opportunity to just be time cautious by setting up a timer on my screen that will enable me keep track of how much time I'm using, so that I don't disadvantage the rest of my colleagues and the benefit of this conversation.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so firstly, I have to really appreciate the fact that, you know, all the rest of the panelists have done a very commendable job on breaking down some of the aspects of how we've had the shrinking of the civil space and the attempt to define what civil space is, at least from a generally recognized definition. So I think it's really, really fundamental that we get to appreciate a few things about, you know, like the civil space and how some of the challenges that the civil space has been facing that have caused it to shrink. Now, most recently, and perhaps the most notable one, is state intervention in the activities of the civil society organizations, CSOs, perhaps if we might refer to them in this case. So CSOs have essentially been at the forefront of the entire political agenda, or what has been dubbed as the democratic governance agenda. So as I was trying to, you know, like elucidate in the first submission that I had, it was very, very important to track the history of CSOs in understanding how they're operating today and why we have the clampdown on civil societies today. So like I earlier alluded to, the Ike Musazi, you know, very famously in 1938, instituted one of the first civil societies, although it was branded a trade union, but it went ahead to do more political work advocating for civil rights and political rights within colonial Uganda at the time. So what that did was that it sort of like invigorated the stance on political advocacy and implementation against the colonial government. Now, if you fast forward that 50 years later, the kind of CSOs that we have today still advocate for the same thing. So in as much as we look at, you know, products of Center for Constitutional Governance, such as yourself, Matanda, you get to realize that the way how CSOs operate is that they proliferate and political understanding and political advocacy for certain rights and different agenda that stem in line with democracy and good governance. So at that point, you realize that dictatorial states, by and large, or any state, essentially knows that there is a particular problem that comes with having these CSOs operating freely. When CSOs are generally engaging with the public, that means that there is dissemination of knowledge, there's dissemination of things such as, you know, civic education. So when you get to understand that a country like Uganda has more than 70% of its population as youth, many of whom are within, you know, like education system, you get to appreciate how the universities undertake their studies, things such as imparting knowledge through different studies. Now, when you look at how universities interact with the work of CSOs, it's twofold. It's intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsically, you're looking at how individuals such as myself who go to School of Law study about things such as CEHAD, Center for, you know, like Human Rights Development versus the Attorney General. You read about cases such as FIDA versus the Attorney General. So you interact with the work and the values that these civil societies have been advancing through the law. If you look at people who have done, you know, like business, yeah, perhaps someone who is at business school gets to understand that we have CEHAD fighting for economic rights. Perhaps it may not be case law, but they get to appreciate that. But then in the extrinsic aspect of, you know, of university life, these individuals get to understand that, you know, when we have mobilizations such as this one, you're able to interact with university students. And university students are very, very important because they contribute to the academia part of civil society organizations. Recognize that civil society organizations cannot do their work without having a robust research network and a robust reporting system. And very many civil societies have done this. If you look at FHRI, Foundation for Human Rights Initiative, it has engaged, for example, Makerere University in the recent publication that it made. So we think that generally when you have a clampdown on civil society, on civil societies, universities get affected tremendously. And like, you know, like Ruth was saying, it even spills further because these are individuals who are going into the workspace later on. So when you look at, you know, issues such as research work, the idea that there's a trickle down of the benefits. If civil societies have been advocating for the freedom to associate and now they are not there, university students are not going to enjoy that at their own level. When you have employment prospects, you don't really expect us to find jobs in a Center for for constitutional governance. If Center for Constitutional Governance is not there, you don't expect us to have research partners for our projects when the time comes. So generally speaking, and perhaps in my last 10 seconds, I would say it's a very, very detrimental position to be in, especially as university students, if we're having a clampdown of the civil society. Thank you, Matanda. I would like to submit.
Yes, thank you very much, Right Honorable. And without much ado, I'll immediately invite Tracy Jerabo to take it on from there. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Going back to the topic, civic space, we had that a civic space, the purpose of a civic space is to allow free flow of information, yeah? And we all know that being a scientist, I love working so much with numbers, and we know that in Uganda currently we have about 32 universities, and with a student population of about 110,000 and about 30,000 graduates annually. So definitely with a shrinking of the civic space, which we say that allows people to organize, participate, communicate with each other without hindrance, we are definitely having so many issues. We are having people having to talk via the internet. We're having people students having to reach each other over the internet because they can't freely meet now. They have to do it virtually. So we have issues like maybe high data costs on students. Then we have had issues whereby some people have been arrested over things they say over the internet. So we have also had the fear. We have had fear instilled in people. So how do students come up to now? How do university students come up to now talk about things that are affecting them? Clearly, this shrinking of the civic space has definitely cut off the free flow of information amongst the students. We all know that being a university student personally, I've definitely learned how to pick up so many ideas from my friends at school. I've seen very many of my friends going into businesses. I've seen very many of my friends doing so many things just because I see their way of life. I see how they're taking themselves. So this point I'm driving to is the market, the whole idea of the universities being market places for ideas. So definitely having these places, having the civic space shrunk, it has gone ahead to limit us and our thinking. We are not interacting as much as we used to. We're not having the flow of information as we used to. The social capital and the networking has also definitely reduced because we are not meeting our people as we used to. I mean, I've had someone say that social capital is really, really important in life, which I know very many of us can attest to here. So having the shrinkage of this civic space has definitely cut off very many of these benefits that university students have been getting from these civic spaces. Maybe if I can summarize that, I have points like the high data cost, the fear amongst the students to share their ideas, the learning, the exposure has definitely reduced. Yes, we are trying to do it virtually, but there are some people who can, like we can. There are some people who cannot reach out to really because of not being able to. With that, I can summarize my points and thank you so much.
Can we have Baruku, Derek? And after Baruku, Ruth, feel free to come on board with your 5 minutes.
So thank you so much, Mr. Matanda, for the opportunity again. So I'm going to be very brief, but then I'm going to start with a point that's a bit very personal, that's a bit from a personal experience. So for the fact that I sit on the cabinet of Makerere Debating Union, there's some information that I'm privy to that I would want to share with us that would maybe help us understand how really the shrinking civic space has really impacted so much on our life as university students. So to begin by, there is what we call Makerere Debating Union. It's a debate union that brings together people around Makerere University from all walks of life to come and debate, freely express themselves, and to learn and to do a lot of things. So at Makerere Debating Union, we have a patron, but then our patron, according to our constitution, our patron is the DVC academics, the Deputy Vice Chancellor academics. But then to anyone who has been in any public university or in any organization, you would want, or you would actually attest to the bureaucracies associated with the problems of getting to these people. So actually, these people are not that approachable. They're not, to see him, it can actually even take you a month to see that person. So as MDU, we sat down and thought and were like, maybe we should bring some other person on board who would be welcoming, a very distinguished person. So when we sat down, we zeroed on one person, and that's Mr. Godba Tumushabe, the one of Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. So when we reached to Mr. Godba, he allowed to be our patron, and he has been very, very steadfast and instrumental in our activities. For example, there is a time that we held the Ivory Tower debate tournament. He actually provided us with funding. He gave us money. He gave us he actually also taught us on how to go about research and so much of very many things that we've learned from him. And then of recent year, we've got to learn about the closure of civil society organizations, including this Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. So only the thought of the closure of this civil society makes us shiver as students, because really, where are we going to get the funding? Okay, the university is there, but then this was a really trusted source. He was very steadfast. He was helping us, but then now they're going to close the civil society. I mean, it doesn't augur well at all with our activities or anything that we are doing. It is really, I don't know what words to say, but it is frustrating really to see that maybe your funder and the activities we do at MDU, these activities are to benefit all the students. They are to instill confidence in students, because it is only through debate that people can come up to solve problems. Remember, if we don't ask any questions through debate, we'll never solve our problems. So the shrinking space, exactly about that point, that really makes us very, very frustrated. And I know most of you see the problem with that. And then the other thing I can talk about is the idea of free markets. Anyone who has done anything about economics or anything, or anyone who knows about capitalism, we know for all countries or for any economy to develop, there must be an aspect of capitalism, or there must be an aspect of free markets. There shouldn't be any government intervention. If it's there, then maybe it's to do something little, maybe let's say with legislation and building infrastructure, or maybe offering subsidies. And that's where necessary. But then if we have a lot of state intervention, if people cannot freely associate, if people cannot freely come together to do what they want, then that means even the markets, the markets are not going to be free. There's going to be a lot of state intervention. So innovations are going to shrink. So that will automatically put the economy down. That's one point. I think I'll also allude to a personal experience. There's one time with Dr. Sewanyana of Foundation for Human Rights Initiative, and he told us about his experience at Cape Town University. He told us at that university you could actually breathe freedom. People were so grounded in freedom. Even the university itself used to uphold free expression, freedom of assembly, and peaceful association of people. So in such a circumstance, you could see that universities like the Cape Town University are one of the very best universities we have in the world. That's because there is freedom of expression. There is the civic space is non-shrinking, like the one we have in Uganda here. And then the very last point I could talk about is the clampdown on social media or Facebook. With the advent of the coronavirus, we've all learned to go virtual. All our businesses, everything, generating ideas, talk about innovations, talk about learning, talk about watching YouTube videos to learn. All of that, you can find all those videos on Facebook. You can talk to friends on Facebook. But imagine this is a place that has been closed by the government. And there's also they've also put a social media a tax, really, the 12% tax. So really, this impinges on freedom of expression. Remember, universities are places where ideas are born. These are places whereby people come together, because these are places where people have a lot of knowledge. So if these places where people can associate from, places like Facebook, are closed down, so that really poses a great challenge to this country. So really, it is a trickle-down effect. Economic development cannot take place because there is shrinkage of civic space. I beg to submit. Thank you.
Thank you. Fellow panelists, allow me to make so well the effect, so the impact of shrinking civic space on universities is actually, if we sit down to talk about it, it would take us a lot of time. There are things that we can express verbally. There are those things that we might not even say, which means that the impact is widespread. It is felt. But some of the few things I would like to present, for example, there is an impediment to growth of democracy and the rule of law. So in universities, we have, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, that it is a place where people are trained to be leaders. For example, we have a guild president, we have the speaker, we have the people, the GRCs, all those people who are going to be actors in the next generation. So when you look at actually the politicians we have in Uganda right now, most of them have been to universities. Makerere used to mention whatever, but they have gone to school, they have been to universities. So if civic space is being shrinked, yeah, and we are actually having people not allowed to associate freely, not allowed to meet peacefully, in the instance of campus universities, where people meet to speak peacefully and then they are attacked. Even outside campus, we have seen these things where people meet to talk about how elections have, all those things indicate at the end of the day for people who are in campus leadership, that if you can fight your way to that top, you can control everything. You have the right to sit and on civic space. You can shrink it as long as you fight your way to the top. So you see, if we have such people who have been leaders and who have been affected by the shrinking civic space, and they eventually make it to the top, what are they going to do? They are going to reproduce exactly what they have seen in most cases. And then we shall not have rule of law in this, if it is failure to have rule of law in one regime, it will carry on to the next regimes. Another point I would like to make, also productivity and exchange of ideas between students is affected, you understand. So if civic space, for example, if we are supposed to meet, if FDC or if NRM, we are supposed to meet as leaders, if there is an FDC caucus in campus, and then we meet to discuss how we are going to forward our agenda. And then before we have pushed 10 minutes into the discussion, the police has been called and we are being attacked and we are being beaten. At the end of the day, what I would have liked to tell my associates will not be passed on. Why? And because we have been attacked, we cannot even stand on the law to say that we have a right to do this. By the time you're saying we have the right, you're already having handcuffs on you and you're already on the police vehicle. And what does that mean? That our ideas that we would have exchanged, ideas that are going to spread, because even the best ideas that we see right now have come from people, they have spread through people, because an idea is nothing when it does not have people who believe in it and people who spread it. So our productivity as regards exchange of ideas and implementation of these ideas has been put down as university students. Then research, which is very important in campus, is also going down. We realize that civic societies, we have community-based organizations, we have mass organizations, we have religious organizations, we have corporate philanthropy. There are so many types of civic organizations. So if the civic space is being shrinked, it means that the area of working of these people is also being shrunk. What does that mean? That people have, you realize that NGOs or other organizations do not usually employ people in government to do for them their research. They employ the common man. What does that mean? Me and you, campus students. And when we graduate, there are these people who give us jobs. So if it is being closed down, if these things, civic space is being shrunk, and at the end of the day, their activities are put down. At the end of the day, what does that mean? That if they are not allowed to operate, it means we are not allowed to operate. It means that the research that we would have done that could be informative, that could guide policies, is also going to be impeded. What does that mean at the end of the day? That research is going to go down, democracy is going to go down. It's like a pyramid. One thing causes another to happen. Then we have the low growth rate of universities, because if universities have ideas, for example, we have Mwele in Makerere. It is an online learning platform. You know, if this idea had not been conceived by someone who did IT and brought to life, we would not perhaps be studying online. But because this idea was conceived and this person was allowed to do what they're supposed to do, because they had the infrastructure that was needed, it came to life. So the university grew from going around lecture halls, lecture rooms, and then we can be each in our homes and attend a similar lecture. We can write our notes, we can pick notes from Wele, and we can study. We do not need to be on campus. However, if, for example, these ideas have been suppressed, if these ideas have been trampled on, and we cannot meet to develop another Mwele, we cannot meet to develop another idea that could propel the university forward, then definitely we are not growing as a university. There are so many other effects I would mention. However, I am time bad.
I wanted to thank you for the presentations, and to say now we are going to move to a level where we sort of probe some of the assertions we have made, and also try to suggest which way. If the status quo, because we all seem to be agreeing that we're agreeing with the assumption that the civic space has shrunk, and we have in various ways shown how this affects the institutions of higher learning. The question then is now, therefore, which way? And I think that we have not, we seem to be laying a lot of blame on the political actors, but I would like to hear from you what you think has been the role of students themselves and student leaders in facilitating this shrinking space. If you look into history, you realize that, first of all, space is usually struggled for, it's usually fought for. And some of the people who are historically acknowledged for fighting for civic spaces are students and youth. How then is it that in this day and age, we are simply mourning and lamenting about the space shrinking? What went wrong? Where is the role of bodies like debate societies, the Law Society, the Guild Governments, the Uganda National Students Association? So As we now move to this third half, which also is going to bring us to the end of this conversation, I'd like us now to change the guns and face them towards ourselves, and in the same breath, try to cast a light on what can be done to change this. And this time around, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Baluku Derrick. You have 3 minutes to do that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matanda. So now I wouldn't want so much to start apportioning some sort of blame, but then I would want to look at the reality as it stands and what is happening really. So we can probe the students' engagement in promoting freedoms around the university. I'll give you, again, a personal example or a personal experience. And this is a person that I've actually engaged with on several occasions. And this is my brother. We have an activist at Makerere University that is called Obed Derrick. And this is a guy who has been around university for some good time. He knows what exactly must be done, I would assume, going by the way he has usually presented himself. So this is a guy who has actually time and again fought for students' rights, I would say, during the social media tax. When they imposed the social media tax, we all remember that 200 shillings that we have to pay as that we had to pay as a social media tax. This guy came out. He came out with his friends. They protested. They refused this suggestion because it was going to impinge on students' rights, because if they put a social media tax, that means that people are not going to freely express themselves, or they are not going to freely associate on online platforms. And this is a guy who came out to protest this. But what happened? Whenever he came out to protest this, he was arrested several times and was actually beaten. He was brutally arrested. I have photos and videos of this. If maybe any time after here, I would send them. But this is a guy who was brutally arrested. And it's not even alone. There are very many activists at Makerere, and these are student activists. These guys have done a very commendable job. Whenever there is something that is that impinges on their rights, they come up, not violently, but actually peacefully, maybe with placards, to go and protest. But then the students, they are beaten. So
okay, so your assertion is to say it looks like the students have played their part, or they are willing to play their part, but you're sort of blaming the response of the state. Is that so?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so if you'll allow me now across to Ruth and ask Ruth if she agrees with you. Ruth, do you agree with Baruku's assertion that the students have actually played their part, but possibly the shrinking we see is because of the violence they are met with?
Thank you, Matanda. To an extent, I do agree that students have come up to fight for the shrinking space, yeah? Because when you look at Makerere, for example, you cannot, where students have not come up to protest something that is union. However, that does not mean that they are not leaders in places that are not actually keeping quiet. For example, in a college where I am, College of Vet Medicine, you find some leaders are not doing their part in informing people what their rights are, collecting people's opinions and telling them about how they can fight for civic space. So I do agree with Baluku that yes, partly student leaders have done their part, but they have been met with violence, and they are not protected in any way, because if we say the university should come up and help them the university is the one instigating this violence in the first place. And then for those that fear this violence, they have chosen to keep quiet, whether or not they are, I don't know whether it's because they are not informed or because they.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And allow me move to someone actually who is holding some sort of space, being a speaker of the Makerere Society. Mayanja, your colleagues finding a scapegoat, I would put it to you that this violence has happened in 1976 when students tried to protest. So do you agree with this suggestion that as students you commendable?
Well, thank you very much, Council Matanda. I think it's goes that he who is given much, a lot is expected in return. So I think that it is agreeable that students have indeed been given a role to play when it comes to the democratic governance agenda. And it's very paramount to recognize that we have obligations to fulfill. So I would agree to an extent that yes, acknowledge the fact that very many student leaders face specific challenges. Yeah, some that are on their own accord and others that are out of their reach. Firstly is the question of impaired objectivity. Next is like the worsened demonstration effect. Now, firstly, to understand impaired objectivity, you recognize that, for example, at a university like Makerere University, there is a certain interpretation that individuals who go to the street and individuals who protest against state operatives are then the better leaders for us because they can be able to stand up. So it is most likely that a leader who has not undertaken, who has not partook in a strike or has not been brutally arrested by police cannot win a guild election, right? So I think that in itself becomes an impediment to actually advocating for the things that we intend to have, because then it makes most of these fights a bit more individualistic. You know, Derek has been sharing a lot about personal experience, and rumor has it in the corridor that most of the individuals who run for guild presidency or any other position are castigated once they have not sacrificed a bit of themselves to that is spread all across the world. Well, even the political terrain of Uganda has had it that way. I think that's something that we can really acknowledge that is a bit of a challenge on student leaders, which then takes us to the second question. I think the biggest challenge that we have as student leaders or even as civil society organizations is how do we measure the impact that we have? How do we measure that Center for Constitutional Governance is doing a good job? How do we measure that university student leaders are doing a good job when it comes to questions such as the democratic governance agenda? So it's very problematic to say, for example, that because we've had this discussion today, we can therefore assume that everyone now understands civil society organizations and that they will work together to ensure the same. So that kind of demonstration effect is very, very, like complex. It has so many intricate nuances that make it hard for us to actually say that student leaders are doing their job, which then lastly speaks into, do people do what they do because it is part of the governance agenda? I might, for example, vote because I want to vote for someone, not knowing that it's part and parcel of a good democratic governance system, of constitutional law, of rule of law by and large. So I think it's a very tricky question that you've asked, and it's a very important one. But I think that we can really apportion blame to student leaders for the challenges that they have faced at a certain point. But then I also agree with all the other panelists that the state intervention, at least in that arbitrary manner, has impeded the ability to address most of these questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Baruku. Back to you, Tracy. You had from Baruku, this was Mayanja. You heard from Baruku and Ruth, who seemed to suggest that students have done something. And then Benson comes in and he's actually punching some holes in some of the people they are holding up as heroes, saying some of these seem to be opportunistic as they're just seeking political capital, but maybe not to engage civically. I want to bring another dimension. If we are looking at institutions of learning, universities, as marketplaces for ideas, besides demonstrations, are there no other avenues of expressing ideas? Where are the articles in the newspapers by students on the different things that are happening? Where are the groundbreaking publications by students? You know, students in universities write dissertations. How many of these actually end up being relevant and are worthy publishing? Where are the public dialogues? I have been invited before by the Law Society and the Debating Society and the Guild at Makerere to have political conversations. But the hall was empty with only a handful of students of political science. I speak to some elders who said that this was not the case. Previously, students were interested. So is it not unfair to just blame the system, whereas possibly on the side of students, there has also been a dearth of interest and capacity? To you, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think in all you have said, there's that question you imposed and you said, besides demonstrations, isn't there any other things that students can go ahead and do to be heard? Personally, first, I'm a GRC at my college, CONAS. So I happen to sit at the guild with very many other GRCs in the 86th house of Makerere University, Guild House of Makerere University. But whenever something happens, or whenever something comes up and it is bothering the students, it takes a lot of pressure from the students for the administration to actually come out and pay attention to it. That's why you see that in most cases, students are going to be forced to go and demonstrate, just like what Baluk talked about, because I happen to know Obed as well. He has been arrested on very, very many occasions. But by the time students decide to demonstrate, it's not like they just wake up in the morning and they're like, we're going to do this. It's after a very long process of this has happened, and there is no other solution. Yeah. Though I also want to agree with the current with Benson, who said some students go ahead and maybe do it for their selfish interests and all. Yes, it happens, but definitely sometimes in the university with the administration that we have tend to work with, it's really, really rare for them to go ahead to listen and to pay attention to what the students want before they see something happening, maybe before they see them do something and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm saying this without any bias or without any fear or favor, but that's how it is. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, for that perspective. I jumped off and missed part of your submission, but fair enough. We are now going to move towards our closing statements. And so we are going to do a round again of about 3 minutes. And we expect you in your closing speech to bring out the aspects I raised earlier on where do we go from here? What do we do? Who are the stakeholders? Who takes what part of this struggle? So I'm going to still start with Ruth.
Thank you, Matanda. So as we conclude, of course, there are different actors if we want to increase civic space, of course. So one of the things that I think should be done is sensitization. Yeah, sensitization should be done, because you do not say you don't want something that you do not know, or you want something that you do not know. What you want should be defined, and you must know what is expected of you, your responsibility. So sensitization goes all the way down, even to student leaders. They should be able to, student leaders should be able to come up and sensitize people. What should be done? What right do they have? How can they have their voice heard? Is it through a strike? Are there other means? And the question at the end of the day they should be guiding students. Is it when we sit down and write a letter, which we have done for very many years, are we going to be listened to? Then, of course, there should be a visible rule of law. And of course the legislature there should, but what we can see with our eyes.
Ruth, I don't know whether it's my network, but I'm missing a lot of what you're saying. I don't know if you can be stable or still in one.
Okay, sorry about that. So to recap on what I've said, I mentioned that there should be sensitization by student leaders to tell the people they represent, yeah, about how they can enlarge this civic space, to tell them about their rights, to tell them about their responsibilities, because we cannot demand for things that we do not know, yeah. Then also on the part of government, we have to, this goes to the legislature, of course, the ones that make the laws. When we are singing about rule of law, it should not be on our lips that we have rule of law in Uganda, or we are going to achieve rule of law in Uganda, down to the universities, to everywhere. We should be implementing the rule of law. If a law is there and we have the right to come up and we are protected by the law and we can move around with our posts and all that are not abusive, that show that we are dissatisfied with the current conditions, then of course the law should be there to protect us. And of course, those ones that implement the law should also be educated on how to deal with people. If it is an arrest for something that has been done that is wrong, and then therefore, if they are arresting this person, they should have this person, of course, arrested with dignity. You do not have to kick someone to put handcuffs on them and put them on a police car. You can just request them put handcuffs on them, and where reasonable force is required, you can apply it. So of course, state has to be a major actor, and student leaders as ourselves, we have to know our responsibilities. Yeah, if we are going to be future leaders, and how are we going to come into power? What is our agenda? Are we going to promote violence to become leaders, or we are going to promote the rule of law where everyone can do what they have to do and it is backed up by the law? So allow me to conclude with that. Thank you, Matanda.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's now go to Baruku. Mr. Baruku.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. So about my closing remarks, I would want to dwell so much on our role as students to see that we can uplift ourselves. So clearly, to the government part, the issue of rule of law and the issue of human rights, clearly it is not within their priority, based on what we've seen, the torture, the beating of people, the brutal arrests. So clearly to them, that's not a priority. So what does this speak to? This, again, is a call to us as students to come up and do whatever is possible to see that we can uplift ourselves and we can make the environment that we want. And how are we going to do that exactly? This is going to be by joining debate unions. All universities have debate unions. So this is a great chance. A student can join a debate union, because in a debate union, this is where you're going to suggest motions. This is where you're going to express yourself freely. This is where you're going to learn a lot about human rights. This is where you're going to come and associate with other people. So the mantle and the way forward is for us students to proactively engage in activities and things that are going to uplift ourselves, rather than maybe looking at the government, because for them, we are not a priority to them. So students can engage in debate activities. They can write. For example, at Makerere, we have very many. There is the Makerere, the Makerere Society Journal. There are a lot of news outlets, so students can engage in a lot of these to learn and to teach their fellow students about the human rights, about civic space. And by that, I think we shall be better people and we shall improve our environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baruku, for that submission. And Let's hear from Tracy now.
Thank you so much. I think I agree with the precurrent speakers that have talked about sensitization. Generally, we just need to, as student leaders, we just need to engage our fellow students. We need to increase the student engagement as well and create awareness. Like Derek said, maybe they could join the debate union. They could generally, we need to look for ways to increase that, to allow and increase that free flow of information. And as student leaders, I know we have, being leaders, we have that advantage of our fellow students because we speak most times and they tend to listen. So can we use those positions of power to impact on our fellow students? Can we get them to know about civic spaces, to know the advantages, to know their rights, so that they can as well share on the benefits and know that this is all for their own good? Yeah, that's how I'd love to conclude. Thank you so much.
Yeah, before you go, I realize that so far all of you have spoken are not speaking to the shrinking space. Does that assume that the back ends with the students? What do we do with the shrinking space? Because you all submitted towards the fact that the space has shrunk. So what do we do in that respect?
In the respect that the space has shrunk. Okay, yeah, we talked about the shrinking civic space. We said that we have a less flow of information among the university students. We have a less flow of information among the market ideas of the students. So my point was, since we are agreeing that yes, it has shrunk, what do we do? Can we engage more the students now, because we have realized it has shrunk? Can we get more students on board? Can we get them to know about like how Baluku talked about, like the debate? Can we get them to join some of these platforms so that they can share? Can we create more awareness? Like, I'm looking at it in the sense of sensitization and getting more people on board. Yeah,
okay,
that's all I can do. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. And Right Honorable Benson, you've heard from your colleagues. Which way? Do you think they have covered it, or is there an angle that possibly we are missing?
All right, thank you very much. All right, so I think it's quite important to recognize that most of the things that have been dealt with stem down to the responsibilities that we have as students. But allow me just try to narrow some of these angles to look at it from a different perspective. So, like, firstly, I think it's very important that we need to build a capacity within the universities. So the actors that we have there under include the university administration and university leaders. So what we do, for example, is shift the pedagogical approach to how we understand and how we study at school. Now, Dr. Ruhweza Daniel wrote a book on the things that we don't teach at the university. The Makerere Law Society has been pursuing a certain pedagogical approach known as the External Correspondence Initiative. So what we do is that we link up with different colleges, for example, CONAS or courses, and we try to see the nexus or the link between the law and that particular field of study. So what we're able to do when we have these kinds of discussions, publications, and webinars is that we are able to draw a certain linkage between the law and that particular domain. For example, medical negligence, for example, technology and the law, for example, education or psychology and the law. What we're able to learn in between is that we're able to equip students from both colleges or all colleges with that different perspective to understanding at school. Now that's very important because then we're able to like proliferate what Tracy and Ruth were talking about, the rule of law, to understand the different things that we are not taught in our specific areas. And that's important because inherently, that's what the the good governance agenda is all about. So I think that's very, very, very important. But then also, for example, like you said, what way do we go forward? How do we try to revitalize this shrinking space? I think it's important for funders, especially with the shift in financing models, to really look at member-based organizations. CSOs and NGOs are basically defined as non-governmental, as not-for-profit.
Sorry, Benson, your network seems to be holding you.
Really try to
Benson, hold it.
Exploit that space. Oh, apologies. Am I visible now? Am I audible?
Yes, yes. So you may have to redo
Am I audible
what you
now?
said in the
Okay.
last 10 seconds. Yes.
All right, the last 10 seconds. I was saying that it's important that perhaps the funders need to shift their financing more areas. When we look at things such as trade student associations, if funding can be taken into these, like societies to teach them the business-related domestic agenda, I think that would be very important. Take, for instance, there's been a lot of literature on human rights and business, yeah, like the human rights-based approach to business. And that's very important because employers and employees are able to know their rights and know the rights that accrue to them as labor workers, right? So that's very, very important. And I think it's something that we can adopt to avoid things that affect us in the different ways that they do. But then lastly, and quite as I finalize, the concept of state intervention is not about to get done, and we're not about to finish state intervention, merely because even the NRM government that we have today was here because of CSOs through the Resistance Council. So CSOs are looked at as political threats, right? Because they are able to disseminate political agenda and knowledge of human rights. But the state should recognize that you are better off with an enlightened populace as opposed to that which is not enlightened. Revolutions have happened before in history, and we recognize that the people that instigated those revolutions were particularly those who had challenges within the lower sector of society. So it's in the best interest of the state to have like these civil societies go out and like engage with students, engage with the populace, so that the kind of problems that we suffer with in 2030 or 2040 are not problems of small scale agriculture, but rather questions of, say, for instance, political ideologies or questions of industrialization or middle income problems, things like that. And for me, that would be my closing remark. That's what I would think we really need to look at. It's a very important question. It's a pertinent question. The future of this nation depends on how well we are able to recover from this shrinking civil space. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Benson. And ideally, we should be closing it at this, but we still have a few minutes. And I do not know whether, as your colleagues were making presentations, all of you, if there is anything anyone said and it created a question or comment in your mind, we could use the next few minutes for you either to ask them to elaborate on something you didn't get, or answer a question you have, or maybe you give an angle that makes it better for us to understand the point they were trying to make. Does anyone have any issue they want to raise to a colleague or bring to the attention of a colleague?
Oh, well, it's all good from my end. I certainly agree with what most of my fellow panelists were able to present to us.
Okay, Derek, do you have anything you want to put across to the colleagues or a colleague?
No, not really. Everything has been ironed out, not entirely, but then to a satisfactory level.
Okay, Tracy.
Yes.
Yeah, do you have any question for any of your colleague panelists, or anything that came up that I might have missed? Okay,
no,
and you? Okay, thank you, Tracy. And you, Ruth?
No, certainly not. Thank you, Matanda.
Okay, we seem to be being very kind to each other, which is good for team spirit. And so it is that very team spirit that we are going to ask you to employ in choosing among yourselves who is going to represent the university in the round where you're going to interface with your colleagues from the other universities. Let me just try to get information here about which the group you're in and the universities you're going to be interfacing with. Just a moment. Yeah, so Makerere University, you are in the same group with Bugema University, Kampala University, and Kavale University. I think Masesa will be sharing with you a poster where you can refer to get this. but for purposes of just taking note that you're in the same group with Bugema University, Kampala University, and Kabale University. And so what is required of you right now is for you to, possibly you can take time tomorrow and watch the show, because it could be that you are focusing so much on your presentation and did not get time to listen to your colleagues. So you could take time and watch the show tomorrow, listen to your colleagues, listen to the entire conversation, and then you collectively make a choice on who you think is best positioned to represent the university, because eventually we shall need one representative such that we make up the 4 panels with one coming from each of the universities. Damian shared the parameters we use to judge, and so you could use those to weigh and see. At this stage, we decided that we leave it up to you rather than possibly judging and having to choose the person on our own. We are counting on your team spirit and having the interest of the university at heart. And that person, of course, may not necessarily mean that they're the best among you, because still you're going to work together to see that, and you're all going to be there during the debate to fight and see that you carry the day. So with that, I want to say it has been an honor to moderate this conversation. I had a few network challenges. I'm in an unfamiliar place, and so got some hitches here and there, but I think we have been able to pull it off. It has been very informative and quite incisive. I hope that the viewers are going to benefit as much as I have.